2024 draft combine is now complete, and so with it, I thought it would be fun to talk about what the value of the combine is, why it's such a big event, and does it actually matter? But before we get into the video, I want to take a quick second to ask you to please subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. It really helps us out. If you're a fan of the NFL, you'll love this channel. We release videos every Tuesday and Friday all year round, so please give us some help. Thank you. Now back to the video. So the NFL Combine is far and away one of the biggest events of the NFL year, at least during the NFL offseason. But the real question is, who cares? I mean, like, really, at the end of the day, why do we really care this much about the underwear Olympics? Why is there a week's worth of coverage around guys just running 40 yards, lifting 225 pounds, jumping high, jumping far? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And what you might not know is the NFL isn't the only combine out there. The NHL has a combine. The NBA has a combine. Farmers have combines. Heck, even the MLB has a combine. But all of them pale in comparison to the coverage that the NFL combine gets. I mean, maybe the Farmers Combine gets a little bit more coverage, but we're talking sports here. So at the end of the day, the NFL Combine is a massive event, and a big reason is because the NFL makes it a massive event. The NFL understands that unlike all these other sports, football is scarce. You only have NFL for like 4 months of the year and then an additional month of playoffs. Compare that to basketball, hockey, or baseball, which are at least 6 months of the year, plus an additional month or two of playoffs, and they play way more games in the period of their regular season. Baseball's 162, hockey and basketball are 82, football is 17. So football is so scarce that the NFL understands that we as fans will eat up anything they give us. And so they give us a week worth of future top prospects running around in their underwear, and they know us NFL fans are going to eat it up. But the question is, does any of this matter? Does any of this mean anything for NFL teams or NFL players? And I'll start with an example. Let's look at Tyreek Hill and Calvin Austin. These guys had extremely similar measurables. They're the same height, weight's pretty similar, 40-yard dash and vertical jump. Tyreek Hill leads barely. Broad jump, Calvin Austin leads barely. But if you look at these players in actuality, Tyreek Hill is one of the top wide receivers in the NFL. He was on pace for 2,000 yards at one point this season. Compare that to Calvin Austin, who in his second year, in his first year actually playing, had 17 receptions for 180 yards with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yet, Calvin Austin was actually drafted higher than Tyreek Hill was drafted. But at the end of the day, it's because it doesn't actually matter that much. These measurables are not what matters. What matters is that Tyreek Hill can beat you over the top or underneath or through quick cuts. He has a lot of things in his arsenal. Yes, his speed and his stature are helpful, but it's not the reason he's so exceptional. Calvin Austin, on the other hand, at least thus far in his career, hasn't shown the ability to be multi-dimensional. And you know, at the end of the day, Tyreek Hill, he's an Olympic caliber sprinter. In fact, a 6'5", 235-pound Calvin Johnson is closer in 40-yard dash time to Tyreek Hill than Tyreek Hill is to the fastest all-time time, being Xavier Worthy just this past weekend. And before that, John Ross, who had a 4.22 40-yard dash, but was a complete bust at the wide receiver position, because it's not all that matters. At the end of the day, while physical measurables matter, what also matters is your ability to play the game, your ability to understand what your opponent's doing. That's very important, and your measurables can never actually say how good you are in that. So I want to go through a couple of NFL Draft Combine stories to explain this point in a bit more detail. And we'll start with this guy, the man, the myth, the legend, Mike Mamula. So many of you probably haven't heard of Mike Mamula. In fact, until doing this video, I had never heard of Mike Mamula. But this guy is known as the guy who broke the NFL Combine. In 1995, Mike Mamula understood something that you or I implicitly understand, but wouldn't actually ever put into an NFL context. So imagine you're in school and you don't know what questions are going to be answered on a test coming up. You're going to study everything. You know that not everything you study is going to be on the test, but in order to be best prepared for the test, you need to study everything in order to know what will eventually be on the test. But if you know what's going to be on the test, you no longer need to study everything. You can just study what's going to be on the test, and you're probably going to do better on that test because you were able to exclusively study what was going to be tested, not everything that could be tested. And this is what Mike Mamula understood. He understood that the NFL Combine only tested certain skills, not everything that was required to be a good football player. So what he did, he hired a trainer and exclusively trained 40-yard dashes, vertical jump, broad jump, lifting weights, the Wonderlic test, etc. And what did he do? He absolutely crushed all of them. As a massive defensive end, he had a sub 4.6 40. He lifted 26 reps of 225. He had a 49 out of 50 on the Wonderlic test because he studied for them. He didn't just practice football. He exclusively practiced this. And so what was the result? I mean, sure, he went out and did this, but what matters is what did it come to? Well, a guy that was expected to go between the 3rd and 6th round of the NFL draft ended up going 7th overall. In fact, the Philadelphia Eagles traded up from 12, packaging 2 second-round picks from that draft to go and get Mike Mamula to be their replacement for Reggie White. Yes, they looked at this guy's combine stats and said, this guy could be the next Reggie White. And they made him their 7th overall pick. And the team they traded with was the Buccaneers. And the Buccaneers ended up packaging those 2 second-round picks to get the 28th pick. And so with the 12th and 28th pick, who did the Buccaneers take? Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks. 2 future Hall of Famers. In Warren Sapp's case, he literally only did the weigh-in at the Combine. Darren Brooks also did the running events, but did nothing else. These were guys that had much better college resumes. Warren Sapp was the Defensive Player of the Year in college. Derek Brooks was the Linebacker of the Year in college. These guys were both all-conference team members multiple times and all-conference players, compared to Mike Mamula, who just once in his final year was an all-Big East player. But it didn't matter. His combine performance made the Eagles love him. The Buccaneers ended up taking the 2 better football players, and they ended up winning a Super Bowl with those guys and having 2 future Hall of Famers. So a perfect example of the Combine not actually showing a player's ability to play football. Let's go with a more recent example, and we're going to talk about Dontari Poe. If you're like me, Mike Mamula, you might not know about because that happened when I was 1 year old. Back in 1995. I obviously don't remember that. But Dontari Poe was just over 10 years ago. This guy was projected to be late 1st to 3rd round pick status, depending on how he performed at the Combine and how the draft ended up falling out. But when the Combine came, this 235-pound defensive tackle ran a sub 540. Which is just insane to think about. Like, sub 540s for even decently athletic people is not necessarily easy. Yet for a 350-pound defensive tackle to do that, just insane. He went from 3rd on most people's big boards to 1st on most people's big boards for defensive tackle, and moved all the way up into the high 1st round at one point in time, all because of his incredible potential. Yes, this was the pun that was all over the internet at the time. I kind of like it. It's a pretty good dad joke, I won't lie. And at the end of the day, Dontari Poe was drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs with the 11th overall pick, and he had a solid career. He was named to 2 Pro Bowls, made 1 All-Pro second team, started for 4 teams over the course of a 9-year NFL career, had 20.5 sacks, like a solid NFL career. You're not upset with that pick if you're the Kansas City Chiefs taking him at 11th overall. But who was the next defensive tackle taken? Well, the guy who was number 1 defensive tackle dropped to number 2 because of Poe's performance and ended up going with the very next pick at 12th overall was Fletcher Cox. And say all you will about Dontari Poe, that's a fine pick, but he is nowhere close to as good as Fletcher Cox, a guy who had much better football tape, but didn't have the same combine scores. And so don't worry, Eagles fans. Yes, you screwed up with Mike Mamula, but you still got Fletcher Cox, who helped you win a Super Bowl. You're doing all right. You don't need to worry about it. So these are both just examples of how the NFL Draft Combine can sometimes be misleading. Even when you see these guys with insane raw physical attributes, it doesn't actually tell you if that guy is going to be able to turn those raw physical attributes into actual football skills. So if you've gotten to this point in the video, you're probably thinking, okay, so the takeaway from this video is the NFL Draft Combine doesn't matter. And that's actually not the takeaway from this video. I actually think the Draft Combine is one of the most important events for a team determining who they're going to draft and for determining who is going to be successful in the NFL. But it's not because of who can run the fastest, who can jump the highest, and who can lift the most. It's not because of what you or I see when we turn on NFL Network and see the Combine airing live. It's because of what's happening behind the scenes, and that is interviews. Every team has the ability to select certain players and have a 20-minute interview with these players. Before that interview, they can give guys playbooks, they can give guys things to study, and they have 20 minutes to ask these players questions to understand how this player sees the game, understands the game, how they think about what they're doing, how they read opposing offenses or defenses. And at the end of the day, this is what matters. This is what those raw physical skills can't teach. We go back to Tyreek Hill and Calvin Austin. What's the difference? Tyreek Hill has the ability to read defenses, to read a corner, and to beat a corner to an extent that Calvin Austin, at least thus far in his career, hasn't been able to show. That's the difference between Calvin Austin and Tyreek Hill. It's not their physical attributes, which really are quite similar. It's Tyreek Hill's ability to play the game. And so these interviews are far and away the most important part. But these don't get aired on live TV. These only come out after the draft, and only certain teams release this footage. And why is it? Because it's incredibly internal. It's incredibly important to maintain those things. And you can even see the screen in this picture is blanked out. Why? Because the teams don't want other teams to know how they analyze players' ability to read the game. The whiteboard is blank, the TV screen is blurred out, and it's because that's the image they want to show to the world. This doesn't tell anyone anything. The other thing that the interviews are super valuable for is it's the first and probably only time that you can get the head coach, the coordinator, the general manager, and the position coach all in a room with the player that you like. Throughout the scouting process, only the scouts are seeing these people. And yes, they give reports to those other guys. They let them see film. But the coaches and GM never get to actually interact with the player and understand how the player thinks and how the player operates and how much of that player's skill is just good scheme versus the player understanding what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how to beat an opponent, which is what is going to impact a player's ability to transition to that next level. So at the end of the day, the NFL Scouting Combine is incredibly important, but it's not because of what you or I see on TV. It's because of what happens in the back room to help the coaches and general managers determine who is going to fit in their system and who is going to succeed at the next level. That's it for the video. I hope you all enjoyed. We'll see you all next time. Peace!